Okay, friends. Today we're going to be talking about making connections, okay? So, what is a connection? Well, one of the things is, when my life is a story. I have all kinds of things that happen to me. And you guys, your life is a story. So, these stories might not be written down on paper, but they're actual stories that are in our head. So if I wrote down all the stories of my life, how big would it be? Would it be that big? Or would it be this big? Now, I'm a grown-up, so it probably would be this big. And what would be in my life story? So it would be all the things that I've done, and all the places that I've been, and all the adventures that I've been on, all the vacations I went on, the people that I met, all the kids that I've taught, and all the things that I learned. But in real life, people don't write everything down that they do every single day and all the adventures they went on. What do they do with all those stories? Where do they put them? You guys know where you put them? You put them in a desk? You put them under the bed? No, where do you put them? God, where do you put them?
You put them in...
Look up here. You put them in your brain. Yeah, and your brain's only about this big. And
it,
all those stories go in your brain. All your life stories go in your brain.
and it's like a memory.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a memory. And what's really great is when we read, sometimes this really amazing thing happens when we read. Sometimes from a story in a book can trigger a memory in our head. And when this happens, it's called connecting. It's joining together what you know in your head, your experiences, the things that you've done, and another story, which is the book that you read. Okay, so this is called a connection. So what I'm going to do today, and I'm going to show you what connecting to a book looks like, okay, from the book and in my head. So I'm going to share the story. It's called Chester's Way, and as I read, I'm going to show you my thinking and how I'm connecting to the book. Okay, so we're going to start. This is called Chester's Way, and it's by Kevin Hankes. Okay, Chester had his own way of doing things. Hello, my name is Chester. I like croquet and peanut butter and making my bed. He always cut his sandwiches diagonally. He always got out of bed on the same side. And he never left the house without double knotting his shoes. Chester always had the same thing for breakfast: toast with jam and peanut butter. You know, when I read about Chester having the same exact thing for breakfast, it makes me think of my husband. Every morning he has the same thing every morning for breakfast. Every morning he has to have a banana for breakfast. Every single morning. Has to have it. And that's what it reminds me when I read this. That's what it reminds me of. And he always carried a miniature first aid kit in his backpack, just in case. You definitely have a mind of your own, said Chester's mother. That's one way to put it, said Chester's father. Chester's best friend Wilson was the exact same way. That's why they were best friends. Chester wouldn't play baseball until Wilson played, and they never swung at the first pitch or slid head first. Wilson wouldn't ride his bike unless Chester wanted to, and they always used hand signals. If Chester was hungry, Wilson was too, but they rarely ate between meals. Some days I can't tell those two apart, said Wilson's mother. Me either, said Wilson's father. Chester and Wilson, Wilson and Chester. That's the way it is. They loved to go on picnics. Once, when Wilson accidentally swallowed a watermelon seed and cried because he was afraid a watermelon plant would grow inside of him, Chester swallowed one too. Don't worry, said Chester. Now if you grow a watermelon plant, I'll grow one too. Chester duplicated his Christmas list every year and gave a copy to Wilson because they always wanted the same things anyway. For Halloween, they always dressed as things that went together. Salt and pepper shakers, 2 mittens on a string, ham and eggs. There really are 2 peas in a pod, said Chester's mother. Looks like it, said Chester's father. When I read about all the things that Chester and Wilson like to do together, it reminds me of me and my friend Debbie. When I was in teacher school, she was my best friend, and we did everything together. We had some of the same classes together. We ate lunch together. We liked to go to the same movies and go shopping together. We were together so much, people thought we were sisters. Page stuck. In spring, Chester and Wilson shared the same umbrella. In winter, they never threw snowballs at each other. In fall, they raked leaves together, and in summer, they reminded each other to wear sunscreen so they wouldn't burn. Chester and Wilson, Wilson and Chester, that's the way it was. And then Lily moved into the neighborhood. Lily had her own way of doing things. She wore band-aids all over her arms and legs to look brave. She talked backwards to herself sometimes so no one would know what she was saying, and she never left the house without one of her nifty disguises. Lily waved at all the cars that passed by, even if she didn't know who was in them. And she always carried a loaded squirt gun in her back pocket just in case. She definitely has a mind of her own, said Chester. That's one way to put it, said Wilson. When Lily asked Chester and Wilson to play, they said they were busy. When she called them up on the phone, they disguised their voices and said they weren't home. If Lily was walking on one side of the street and Chester crossed the other and hid. She's something else, said Chester. Looks like it. When I read about them not being very nice to Lily, it reminds me sometimes of the stories that I hear out on the playground of kids that sometimes are not so nice to each other. One day, while Chester and Wilson were practicing their hand signals, some older boys rode by, popping wheelies. They circled Chester and Wilson and yelled really bad remarks. Chester and Wilson didn't know what to do. Just when they were about to give up hope, a fierce-looking cat, there it is right there, with horrible fangs, jumped out of the bushes and frightened the older boys away. And are you who I think you are, Chester asked the cat. Of course, the cat replied. Who do you think it is?
What's her name again?
Well, let's read over here and find it.
I know her, but I don't know her name.
Yeah. Thank you, Lily, said Chester. You're welcome, Chester, said Lily. Thank you, Lily, said Wilson. You're welcome, Wilson, said Lily. I'm glad you were wearing a disguise, said Chester. And I'm glad you had your squirt gun, said Wilson. I always do, said Lily, just in case. You know, when I see how Lily helped Chester and Wilson, it reminds me of when I actually see second graders like you guys who help each other and are respectful and responsible to each other. Afterward, Chester invited Lily over for lunch. You have a muscle mouse cup, said Lily. Of course, said Chester. I do too, said Lily. Same here, said Wilson. Chester and Wilson cut their sandwiches diagonally. Lily asked Chester's mother if she had cookie cutters, and she made stars and flowers and bells. That's neat, said Chester. Wow, said Wilson. That night, Lily invited Chester and Wilson to sleep over. You have a nightlight, said Chester. Of course, said Lily. I do too, said Chester. Same here, said Wilson. Chester and Wilson wanted toast with jam and peanut butter for breakfast the next morning. Boring, said Lily. Try this. This is good, said Chester. Wow, said Wilson. After that, when Lily asked Chester and Wilson to play, they said yes. When they called them up on the phone, they had pleasant conversations. And if Lily was walking on one side of the street, Chester and Wilson waved and ran to catch up with her. You know, when I see how Lily and the boys became friends, it reminds me of my daughter. She had a friend that she did not get along with in first grade at all. They did not get along. And then all of a sudden, this little girl, one day at recess, helped her out at recess when she fell down, and now they're like the best of friends, and they're still in class together. That's what that reminds me of. That's my connection. Chester and Wilson taught Lily hand signals, and she taught them how to pop wheelies. Lily taught Chester and Wilson how to talk backwards, and they taught her how to double knot her shoes. Some days I can't tell those three apart, said Lily's mother. Me either, said Lily's father. Chester and Wilson and Lily. Lily, Wilson, and Chester. That's the way it was. For Halloween, they dressed as three blind mice. For Christmas, Lily gave Chester and Wilson nifty disguises, and they gave her a box of multicolored shoelaces, extra long for double knotting. They loved to go on picnics. When Chester and Wilson told Lily about how they had each swallowed a watermelon seed once, Lily swallowed 3 of them. I'll grow a watermelon plant for each of us, she said. In spring, Chester and Wilson and Lily shared the same umbrella. In winter, they never threw snowballs at each other. In fall, they raked leaves together. And in summer, they reminded each other to wear sunscreen so they wouldn't burn. Chester and Wilson and Lily. Lily and Wilson and Chester. That's the way it was. And then Victor moved in to the neighborhood.
That was a good story.
That was a good story.
Yeah.